When we talk about controlling the mind, we're really talking about mastering the internal landscape in which our thoughts, feelings, and impulses take. And if you want any hope of doing that, the first thing you must come to grips with is this. So you are not your thoughts. That sounds simple, maybe even cliche, but it's a fundamentally transformative insight if you let it sink in. See, most people go through life completely identified with the voice in their head. They assume that whatever they think must somehow be true, or at least important. They don't realize that the mind, left unexamined, will often act like a compulsive storyteller, dramatic, irrational, and repetitive. It spins narratives about who you are, what other people think, what the future holds, and why you're not enough. And unless you've trained yourself to question it, you'll live those stories as if they're reality. Now, from a psychological perspective, this tendency is understandable. The brain evolved to detect patterns and predict outcomes. It's a survival machine, but it's not particularly concerned with truth. It's concerned with safety. So it often exaggerates threats, overgeneralizes from negative experiences, and clings to comforting illusions. This means that many of the thoughts that dominate your mental space are not objective, rational, or helpful. They're just habits of perception, leftovers from childhood, trauma, social conditioning, or evolutionary instinct. So what do you do about it? You begin by noticing. You adopt the stance of an observer rather than a participant. This is where mindfulness enters the picture, not as some spiritual luxury, but as a necessary discipline. You start watching your thoughts the way you might watch clouds move across the sky. You don't try to control them at first. You just observe, and as you do this, something powerful happens. A space opens up between you and the thought. In that space lies the possibility of choice. You begin to realize, wait a minute, just because my mind is telling me I'm a failure doesn't mean it's true. Just because I feel anxious doesn't mean there's actual danger. Just because I want to lash out doesn't mean I have to. That's the beginning of control, not suppression, not denial, but awareness. This is not merely psychological, it's philosophical too. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, understood this deeply. They taught that while you can't always control what happens to you, you can control your interpretation of it. It's not things themselves that disturb us, Epictetus said, but our judgments about them, and judgments are just thoughts you've accepted without interrogation, thoughts you've confused with reality. If you want to lead a life of clarity and purpose, you have to reclaim authorship over your inner world. That means challenging your assumptions. It means asking yourself, where did this thought come from? Who does it serve? Is it rooted in fear or truth? And what would happen if I just let it go? There's a kind of courage involved in this process, because once you start questioning your thoughts, you realize how many of them are built on sand. And that's disorienting at first. But it's also freeing. It means you're no longer trapped in automatic reactions. You're starting to become the kind of person who responds rather than reacts, who chooses rather than obeys. And this isn't about becoming cold or overly analytical. It's about becoming conscious. It's about taking responsibility for the fact that your inner life is not a passive experience. It's a creation. And like any creation, it reflects the quality of your attention and the depth of your effort. One of the most destructive myths in modern life is that your thoughts just happen to you and that your emotions are sacred truths to be followed. That's nonsense. Thoughts are tools. Emotions are signals. They are not dictators. You are allowed to step back, reflect, and redirect. In fact, if you want to live well, you must. It's difficult, yes, especially when the thought is tied to some deep emotional pain or old wound. But the alternative is far worse. The alternative is being ruled by a mind you don't understand, driven by compulsions you don't question, and enslaved to patterns that have outlived their usefulness. This is why understanding the nature of your thoughts is not just some abstract exercise. It's the foundation of self-mastery, because once you can see your thoughts clearly, you can begin to shape them. And when you can shape your thoughts, you can shape your reality. So here's what I want to leave you with. You cannot control your life if you cannot control your mind. And you cannot control your mind until you understand that your thoughts are not you. They're tools. Use them wisely. Don't let them use you. Once you begin to see your thoughts for what they are, transient, often untrustworthy, sometimes useful, you arrive at the next step, learning to direct your attention, because the mind line doesn't just need to be observed, it needs to be trained. And the first domain of that training is attention, your ability to focus deliberately on what matters. You have to understand something fundamental. Your attention is your most valuable resource. It's more valuable than time, more valuable than money, more valuable even than raw intelligence. Why? Because wherever your attention goes, your life goes. Attention is the spotlight that gives meaning and shape to your experience. What you focus on grows. What you ignore fades. That's not just metaphor. That's neuroplasticity. That's how the brain wires itself. Repeated attention reinforces neural pathways. It builds habits of perception and reaction. So if you allow your attention to be hijacked by social media, by fear, by distractions, then your mind becomes the servant of chaos. But if you can harness your attention and guide it, you become capable of order, clarity, and purpose. The ancient practices of mindfulness and meditation weren't invented as spiritual fads. They were developed as tools of psychological mastery. They were designed to train the mind to attend fully to the present moment, without judgment and without grasping. Why the present? Because that's the only place where life actually happens. Not in the past, which is memory. Not in the future, which is imagination. But now, in this very breath, in this very thought, in this very choice, and when your mind learns to rest in the present, even briefly, you begin to reclaim your agency. Now, this isn't easy. Let's not pretend it is. The modern world is structured to destroy your focus. You're bombarded by stimuli engineered to exploit your attention span. Your phone, your notifications, your infinite scrolling feed, they're all designed to fracture your awareness into fragments. The result? Chronic distraction, mental exhaustion, a baseline anxiety that never quite goes away, And here's the real danger. The more distracted you are, the more vulnerable you become to manipulation. You can't think clearly if your mind is scattered. You can't reflect deeply if your attention span has been eroded by constant interruption. So the practice of mindfulness isn't just a wellness tool. It's a form of resistance. It's an act of intellectual and psychological rebellion. It says, no, I will not surrender my mind to every passing impulse or external demand. I will learn to choose where I place my attention. I will learn to dwell fully in the now. What does this look like in practice? It starts small. You sit still. You bring your attention to your breath, not because breathing is magical, but because it's always with you, always happening now. You notice when your mind wanders, which it inevitably will, and then you gently bring it back over and over again. That's the rep. That's the training. Just like building muscle at the gym, you're building strength in your attention, repetition after repetition. And something fascinating happens when you do this consistently. You begin to notice the space between stimulus and response. You start to feel the moment before you speak in anger, the instant before you reach for the phone out of boredom, the flicker of anxiety before it takes over your whole system. In that space is power. That space is awareness. And awareness is freedom. Now, some people resist this practice because they think it sounds passive or soft. I don't have time to sit and breathe, they say. But that's missing the point entirely. Mindfulness isn't passivity. It's the opposite. It's discipline. It's vigilance. It's the act of wrestling your mind back from chaos, of saying, I will decide where I put my energy. I will not live on autopilot. And there's a deep philosophical implication here as well. When you train your attention, you're not just becoming more productive, you're becoming more conscious. You're participating more fully in your own life. You're no longer sleepwalking through your days, lost in thought loops and knee-jerk reactions. You're engaging with reality directly as it is, not as you fear it or want it or assume it to be. That's rare. That's powerful. And it's available to anyone willing to sit, breathe, and return. So why does this matter for controlling your mind? Because without attention, there is no control. There's only drift. There's only distraction, reaction, addiction. But when you reclaim your focus, you begin to shape your experience from the inside out. You begin to anchor yourself in something real, something deeper than emotion, more stable than thought. That's the core of discipline. That's the birthplace of freedom. Let me leave you with this. Your ability to focus is your superpower. Guard it, train it, because the quality of your life will never exceed the quality of your attention. Now, once you've created that space between yourself and your thoughts, once you've trained your attention to stay grounded in the present, what do you do with the thoughts that keep returning, especially the painful ones, the inner critic, the spiral of what ifs, the voice that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough? That voice, for many people, is their default. And if you don't learn to confront it directly with precision, it will shape your identity in ways you're barely aware of. Here's the thing, negative thoughts don't just stay thoughts. Left unchecked, they become beliefs, and beliefs over time crystallize into identity. You think a thought like, I always mess things up, and if you hear that often enough, especially if it was planted early by someone else, you start to assume it's who you are. And once something becomes part of your identity, it becomes invisible. It stops feeling like a thought and starts feeling like truth. But it isn't truth. It's a story. It's a map you've mistaken for the territory. And if you want to control your mind, you have to begin editing that map consciously, carefully, and honestly. This is where the idea of reframing comes in. And I want to be very clear. Reframing doesn't mean lying to yourself. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it isn't. That's delusion. What I'm talking about is reinterpretation, looking at the same situation through a different lens, one grounded in responsibility, possibility, and agency. Cognitive behavioral therapy has shown us this power in empirical terms. When people are taught to examine their automatic negative thoughts and to challenge the distortions within them, like black and white thinking, catastrophizing, or mind reading, they begin to see things more clearly. Their anxiety lessens. Their depression lifts. Why? Because the story in their mind changes. And when the story changes, the emotional weight of experience begins to shift. Let's say you fail at something, a job interview, a relationship, a business. The untrained mind says, I'm a failure. I can't do anything right. I'll never succeed. That thought feels true because it's charged with emotion. But let's analyze it. Is it really true that you can't do anything right? Is it accurate to define your entire self by one moment? Of course not. That's an emotional generalization masquerading as fact. Now consider the reframe. I failed at this. That's painful, but I can learn something from it. I can do better next time. That's not denial. That's integration. You're acknowledging the pain, but you're refusing to be defined by it. That's strength. That's sovereignty. That's the difference between someone who's at the mercy of their mind and someone who's beginning to master it. But here's the catch. Reframing isn't something that happens once. It's a practice. Because the old thoughts, the old stories, they don't just vanish. They reappear when you're tired, stressed, overwhelmed. They reassert themselves like old ghosts. And every time they do, you're faced with a choice. Do you believe them again, or do you question them? Do you react, or do you revise? And let's go deeper. There's a philosophical underpinning here, too. Nietzsche once said that he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. That's a profound truth. Your interpretation of suffering, the meaning you assign to it, determines whether it crushes you or strengthens you. Pain itself isn't the enemy. It's the story you attach to the pain that determines your outcome. Some people suffer and become bitter. Others suffer and become wise. The difference isn't in the suffering. It's in the framing. Now, that doesn't mean you dismiss real injustice or minimize real wounds, but it does mean that you assume responsibility for what those experiences will mean in your life. Will they be excuses for withdrawal, or will they become raw material for growth? And this is where the spiritual dimension begins to emerge, because reframing negative thinking at its highest level is about redemption. It's about taking what was broken and giving it form. It's about transforming chaos into order, despair into direction. You begin to say, yes, this was terrible, but I'm going to build something with it. I'm going to make it mean something. That's not positive thinking. That's philosophical maturity. That's what allows people to move forward after trauma, to find strength in loss, to create out of destruction. And it begins with the simplest but most powerful question you can ask of any thought. Is there another way to look at this? So when you find yourself lost in negative thinking, and you will, because we all do, don't try to silence the thought. Engage it, dissect it, hold it up to the light and ask, is this accurate? Is it useful? Is it the whole truth? If the answer is no, then reframe it. Not to escape reality, but to see it more clearly, to place the painful facts in a broader, more empowering narrative. Because in the end, your mind is not just a mirror reflecting life. It's a lens shaping it. And here's what I want you to remember. You may not get to choose every thought that arises, but you do get to choose which ones you believe, and the stories you build from them will either imprison you or set you free. At this point, we've explored how your thoughts are not facts, how attention is your anchor, and how you can transform your internal narrative through the act of conscious reframing. But none of it integrates into your actual life unless you build the structure to support it. And that structure is made of habits, daily, consistent, often unglamorous habits, because mental control doesn't emerge from inspiration. It emerges from repetition. This is something that modern culture resists almost violently. We've built a society that worships novelty, speed, and emotion. We've confused discipline with repression and routine with monotony. But that's a catastrophic mistake, because without structure, the human mind tends toward entropy, toward chaos. And that chaos doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like anxiety, like meaninglessness, like a life lived at the mercy of moods and impulses. You want to control your mind? Then you need to start with your day. That's the battlefield. Your mind is not some abstract entity floating in space. It's grounded in a body, in the time, in behavior. You cannot separate the psychological from the physiological, or the philosophical from the practical. What you do is shaping who you are moment by moment, choice by choice. Start with the basics. Sleep, diet, movement. If those aren't in order, you're fighting upstream. Chronic sleep deprivation, processed food, physical stagnation. These are not minor lifestyle choices. They are psychological saboteurs. A dysregulated nervous system cannot sustain focused attention. A body in constant distress cannot foster calm or clarity. So before you write off your lack of focus or emotional volatility as some deep personal flaw, foundations. What are you feeding your system? How are you spending your mornings? Are you placing yourself in a position to succeed? Or are you sabotaging yourself before the day even begins? This isn't about being perfect. It's about being deliberate. If you want to be mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and spiritually grounded, then you need rituals that support that aim, not rituals in the religious sense, although those can be powerful, but rituals as consistent patterns of behavior that reinforce your values, that shape your identity over time, that orient your mind toward order instead of chaos. Consider something as simple as a morning routine. Not because routines are magical, but because the first hour of your day sets the tone for everything that follows. Caput turi fors strup porcation a suffers. If you begin the day reacting, checking notifications, rushing, consuming noise, you've already handed control of your mind to external forces. But if you begin with intentionality, stillness, movement, reflection, you've made a different kind of choice. You've told your nervous system, I'm in charge. I choose how this day unfolds. And the same goes for your goals. Don't wait for motivation. Don't wait for the perfect emotional state. Discipline means doing what is necessary regardless of how you feel. Because here's the truth. Your feelings are not always your allies. They can mislead you. They can trap you in inertia. But action, structured, repeated action, can reshape how you feel. You don't wait until you feel confident to take control of your life. You take control, and the confidence comes later. There's a Stoic principle that applies here. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What does that mean? It means you don't avoid difficulty. You integrate it. You use it as training. Your resistance, your laziness, your distractions, your fear, those aren't reasons to quit. They're signals. They're invitations to sharpen your will, to build the muscle of discipline. And just like physical muscle, mental strength is forged under tension, under load. You get stronger because it's hard, not in spite of it. And over time, that consistency compounds. What begins as small daily disciplines, 10 minutes of stillness, one act of courage, one promise, kept becomes identity. You stop saying, I'm trying to be disciplined. You become someone who is disciplined. And that shift in identity is where true control is born. Not from suppressing desire, but from outgrowing the version of yourself that was ruled by it. Now, let's be clear. None of this guarantees a perfect life. You're still going to face uncertainty, pain, loss. That's part of the human condition. But the question is, will you meet those things with strength or collapse beneath them? Will you respond with order or retreat into chaos? Because in the end, mental control is not about eliminating struggle. It's about preparing yourself for it. And habits are how you prepare. They are how you anchor the insights we've discussed. Awareness, focus, reframing into real embodied life. They are how you move from theory to transformation. So if you've ever felt like your mind is out of control, like your thoughts run you, your emotions dominate you, your life lacks coherence, don't look for a secret hack. Look at your habits. They're the architecture of your mind. Build them with intention. And remember this, discipline isn't punishment. It's alignment. It's the act of becoming who you claim to be, one small decision at a time,